Oman, with its strategic position in the Middle East, is now a developing country of more than 4 million people. But 50 years ago, it was still in a medieval time warp. Ruled by an elderly sultan from his palace, the country had just 3 schools, radios were banned, and slavery was still legal and thriving. And there were no journalists to report that left-wing insurgents supported by Russia and China were rapidly taking over the country. Since the 19th century, agreements with Britain made Oman little more than a colony, making it easy for a British-organised palace coup in 1970. This put a much younger sultan on the throne, allowing a new approach to saving the country from communism. And possibly the most important day in this 6-year-long and very secret campaign took place in a small fishing village in 1972. The Popular Front for the Liberation of the occupied Arabian Gulf was winning the war and planned a decisive blow here. In the early hours of a misty morning, several hundred well-armed and well-trained fighters gathered around Mirbat. They took up positions unseen by the few defenders, but crucially had to delay their attack because of rain. The attack started at around 5 a.m. when some defenders in an outpost near this highway were killed, but not before one of them made a radio call for help. Surrounded and totally outnumbered was a small force of local Omanis plus some SAS based in Mirbat. Soon under attack was this fort, today abandoned, but that morning occupied by about 25 local gendarmeries. Some accounts of that day say they were trapped inside, unable to take part in the battle. Others that they returned fire, including with their one machine gun. Next to the fort was the place that would become the key to the battle. Here there was a 25-pounder gun, today an exhibit in a museum in Woolwich. But that day, one SAS soldier, helped by an Omani, started to fire it against the insurgents. After they were both badly injured, came one of the most famous exploits in SAS history. Under fire and with little cover, one soldier covered around 500 yards across this land, somehow reaching the gun, and when he was killed, another 2 made the near suicidal run. They were able to keep the gun firing, and just as important, out of enemy hands. This was then the fort of the Wali, or the local governor. Today it is a museum with exhibits about the culture of the people around Mirbat, including its music. But there is little about what happened when this fort came under heavy fire that day. Some 30 elderly troops, with out-of-date weapons, returned fire whilst taking casualties. Had the insurgents taken Mirbat as they planned, all these troops and the local governor would have been executed. And close to the Wally's fort was the base of the British Army training team, actually an SAS squadron, part of a secret mission to win hearts and minds and train local fighters. Under intense but not always accurate fire, the defenders were able to respond with machine guns and a mortar, and as the battle continued, casualties sought medical help here. Despite atrocious flying conditions, air support would be crucial that day. By 7 a.m, a helicopter came along the coast and tried to land. Under heavy fire, the pilot narrowly avoided being killed. And as the insurgents closed in on the gun pit, 2 Strike Master jets arrived, attacking at near ground level. Keeping up the attack as long as fuel lasted, they returned the second time, helping to keep the insurgents at bay. And by one of those strokes of fortune that can change battles, the SAS team at Mirbat was due to be replaced the next day, so reinforcements, in the form of 22 heavily armed SAS, were nearby, arriving by helicopter near Mirbat before 11 a.m. By this time, the insurgents had failed to break through, losing possibly 100 dead trying. The 6-hour-long battle that saved this town was close, one thanks to some exceptional bravery, plus some luck, like the failure of some insurgent grenades and rockets to explode. But the failure to take Mirbat proved to be a severe military and psychological defeat. Although the insurgency lasted for another 4 years, arguably this one day was the critical moment that helped to save Oman. One of the most important victories of the Cold War, the Battle of Mirbat, and the campaign in Oman went unreported at the time and for years after. The secret war allowed the Sultan to remain in power, soon to complete 50 years as an absolute ruler. The parliament in Oman has little real power. Political parties are banned, and allegations of torture in prisons persist. Under his rule, Oman has seen considerable economic progress, with many new roads, schools and hospitals. But in this part of Mirbat, where the SAS trained local fighters, provided medical help, and then fought a legendary battle, there is little sign of it. Mirbat is still very much the fishing village it was 50 years ago. And British influence remains, with the signing in early 2019 of a joint defence agreement of enduring friendship. Less public are covert surveillance bases. Just as Oman's location was crucial during the British Empire, today its position next to the Gulf of Hormuz makes it an ideal place to intercept communications. So, this country remains as tied to British interests as it was during that remarkable day in Mirbat in 1972.